First is Michael Plunkett. He's a technical product manager here at Upswing, and he's responsible for making sure that all of our tech projects come together seamlessly. He works between coding, quality assurance, design, and user stories on a daily basis. Michael, you want to say hi?
Yeah, hi. My name is Michael Plunkett. I've been at Upswing for about 3.5 years. I'm happy to talk to you all today.
All right. Next up is our COO Alex Pritchett. He was the one who first invented or invested in our new virtual learning center, and he believes that technology is a powerful tool to retain students. Alex, do you want to say hey?
Hi, everyone. I'm Alex. Really looking forward to talking with you all today about some of the ways in which we're engaging more students through technology. Would love for this to be an open conversation. So if you have any questions throughout, feel free to use the chat box or the chat box here on the right-hand side, and we'll be able to respond to any questions or comments or thoughts that you all have as well.
Yes, perfect. If you have any comments or questions at all, just drop them in the chat box on the lower corner of the screen. So first, I want to talk a little bit about our new virtual learning center. We invested heavily in creating a modern and student-friendly software. While most of the technology in this space has admittedly got pretty stale, we were plugging away at our own end-to-end awesome interface. It was a journey that included more than 100 iterations or production cycles and countless bug fixes. It included trials with over a dozen administrators at different partner schools and over 100 students. It also involved going back to the board 3 separate times, all to ensure that we were creating the best product that we could. This here is a picture of our tech team, who are really proud to be celebrating their 100th iteration on the Virtual Learning Center with some cake, of course. So just to give you a little preview, here is a sneak peek of the new interface. Students should immediately feel comfortable and intuitively understand the Virtual Learning Center because the interface mirrors a lot of the technology that they're used to interacting with on a daily basis. It's one part of a whole entire wave of student service technologies geared toward reaching students in new ways. For a deeper dive into the interface, I'll send out a demo video after this webinar to follow up with each of you, and you can really get into the nitty-gritty of how students and administrators can use this tool. So why did we go to such great lengths to build a state-of-the-art software? Well, it's really simple. The way that we reach, relate to, and ultimately retain students is changing, and luckily it's changing for the better. But enough about us. Let's dive in with our experts. We'll ask a few questions among ourselves, and then we'll have a designated Q&A time afterwards. In the meantime, as Alex mentions, feel free to drop your questions in the chat box on the lower corner at any time, and we'll address them during the Q&A portion closer to the end. All right, so our first question: how does student service technologies reach students? I'll start with you, Michael.
Hey, that's great. So what we'd like to do is take a three-pronged approach. We'd like to meet them where they are, on the devices they're using, and on their schedule. So the way we meet them where they are is through our virtual assistant, Anna, who's already familiar with the student. Through the use of Anna, we know their schedules, their requirements, and their academic goals. The usage of Anna as the usage of Anna increases, we can also gauge sentiment by asking questions like, how do students feel about a specific test? And we can learn to quantify, or we can quantify things that are in the gray area, which is about where you'll get the most meaningful data. If a student's always feeling good about tests, they are likely to engage more with their teacher and in their classrooms. We also work on a plethora of different devices. So modern students are very attached to their devices, much as I think we all are. And it's hard to imagine a student without their precious laptop, tablet, and/or phone. That's why online platforms can be accessed via laptop, tablet, and/or mobile device are paramount. When a student is on their laptop or tablet, they can log in from anywhere with internet access. And we also make sure that while we can take care of them inside the app, we can take care of them outside the app as well. Through the use of Anna, we can remind them of deadlines, such as FAFSA deadlines, or you have a test coming up, through the use of SMS, which, as we know, is probably the most popular medium currently, as phone calls sort of are being, sunsetted. We also have the means to work on their schedule. The online platform is always available. We have tutors available 24/7, and Anna was always there to respond whenever a student has a question.
Okay, awesome. Thank you for diving into that. Alex, do you have anything else?
Yeah, thanks, Sasha. One of the things that we really try to focus on as well, kind of jumping on what Michael mentioned about just the ways in which things like SMS and online resources can really build student engagement, is that we'll work with each of the institutions who partner with us to go in and assess what is the actual engagement like among students. And one of the really key things that we've seen is that when a school decides to do things like utilize Upswing for bringing their student support services online, we're seeing that on average about 10 to 12% of students at the college are engaging with support services. And the reason why that's really important is because traditionally at a lot of these schools, that engagement rate is closer to around 6 to 8%. So we're actually able to help them extend the engagement rate of those resources like tutoring and advising and financial aid support that they already provide. And when we start to leverage different things like SMS and Anna and chatbots, what we also see is that the engagement rate of students who are responding to the chatbot or engaging with reminders or notifications sent out, that ends up being about 50% of all students. And what we've seen traditionally is that when using different campaigns like emails or flyering or direct phone calls, typically the engagement rate's closer to around 10%. So for us, it's really about taking these models that we know can work well, like phone calls and email and traditional face-to-face services, and helping colleges to really scale them so that more students are engaged, more students are interacting with the services that their college provides.
Awesome. So using technology to not only reach students, but to leverage the services that are already in place at a particular school. Okay. On that note, we talked about how student services technology helps students. How does student services technology simplify the lives of admins and faculty? I know that a lot of the admins and faculty that we work with, they are super busy and already crunched for time. What are some ways that we can take some of that off their plate and make their lives a little bit easier?
So three things we generally like to look into to make their lives easier is we first know that any given school has probably more data than they know necessarily what to do with at any given point. And so be that in paper form, be that in digital form.
Like Excel spreadsheets.
Yeah, those are the ones. And very worst, paper. So something that we've noticed is when we visited Central Carolina Community College, we had somebody an admin specifically, who was stuck with, I believe, like it was a stack of papers.
Oh yeah, like binders and binders of all of this information.
Who then had to input that into an Excel spreadsheet and make sure that was passed around accordingly and not edited in the process.
Oh, so they were manually inputting every single thing into an Excel spreadsheet and then printing it out?
That's correct, and or sending that around. So they had to then, after they got the spreadsheet, do all the analytics based on the tutoring hours they got, the number of sessions, the amount of people that came to those specific sessions, and et cetera. Through the Upswing platform, we provide a central place to do all of that. And through the advanced analytics we have and the access to our data department, we can start inferring things in a way that would be, from a one-person standpoint, particularly difficult. We make that all pretty much seamless. From that point, we also make sure that getting into the Upswing environment is a seamless process. There's two ways. Either we can integrate directly with your Active Directory, which is much like you do with Blackboard, Starfish, etc. Or should you want to go through a more basic approach, you can also send us a list of all your users, and we'll make logins for them. Both of those are pretty simple and take no more than probably a day at max. So you now have access to the platform, and you have all this data that is now inside the platform. The next obvious step for us to do is to make this really simple to use. So by the amount of work we put in and the amount of studying we've done in regards to admin's sort of daily routines, we make sure that all sorts of analytics are at the tip of your fingers. You can modify most everything through a single admin portal. You can view, modify, and sort of break down into whatever groups you'd like. You can track student behavior, schedule tutoring sessions for students, along with add students to sessions, etc. We give you sort of infinite sort of modification powers at sort of the tip of your fingers.
Okay. That's all really good to know. Alex, do you have any insights on this as well?
Yeah, thanks, Sasha. So first off, I love that story about Central Carolina. They were one of our first college partnerships about 5 years ago, are still with us today. So I think that the value that we brought to them in terms of cost savings and reducing the need to perform manual entry from a binder into an Excel sheet has really resonated home with them. One thing I wanted to mention as well is that what we see time and time again is that when we start talking to colleges or when they first approach us, often we'll discuss some of the ways in which we help them bring student services online. And what they typically are working with is a kind of like a patchwork of different solutions. So they might have a system that they use for tracking check-ins at their learning center. They might have something else that they're using to allow students to video conference with tutors. They might have something separate that they'll use to track the data, and then they might have something else completely for advising. And one of the really, I think, important points that you hit on, Michael, just now was the ability to track everything in one central location. So not having to go to 4 different systems and train up your staff and faculty on how to use each one, but it's really about having one central place where no matter what kind of information you want to access, it's really easy to get someone new on board because they're already used to using that one system. So that's one of, I think, the values that we see in terms of saving both training costs and also the time that it takes to get the right information out of your systems, is by consolidating that information, having it available in one place, and preventing constant retraining and new platform usage across the board.
Okay, so definitely make faculty and admin's lives easier by consolidating all of this information automatically and then making it really accessible and easy to use. Okay, so we talked a little bit about the faculty behind the scenes. Now let's talk about how technology can reach the students that need it most, the non-traditional students. Uh, how does technology reach non-traditional students, Michael?
So there's we try to do this through a multitude of venues. And something that's really important to us is that we can help sort of each and every student regardless of sort of their respective category and or their experiences prior to coming to the school. We want to make sure that we can help first generation students, ESL students, athletes, disabled students, and students who are developing to get where they want to be. One of the good ways we do to this is through the use of audio and video in our virtual learning center platform. Um, so this gives the students the ability to make connections and relationships with their tutors on a way that's better than just strictly text. There's a lot of nuance in the way that people's faces work when they respond to questions that makes things a lot easier to understand. And while it may not seem like much, that's one of the things that keeps students coming back to our platform. We've seen students typically select tutors who are in a similar demographic to them and return to that student over and over. And I think there's something I think society in general has learned recently in terms of how important representation is. Something that I came from, it was a small town in East Texas. Seeing people who are like you doing things that you want to do is important. You can see yourself in their position, and you can see things no longer as too hard to do or not made for me, but you can view yourself in that position doing those jobs, and that's something that is very important for me.
Like creating those relationships, building a sense of mentorship and inspiration with our professional tutors.
Exactly.
And making students feel comfortable right off the bat because they have a tutor who was in a similar position, was in a similar demographic to them.
Exactly. Something that is also coming from the STEM side of things, screen sharing is really important. If you've ever, while the browser is great, the browser is not made to recreate things like MATLAB or R or really a whole host of proprietary softwares that you'll see just on, I'm trying to think, like a computer itself and or whole applications. So something that we're really proud that we were able to implement is screen sharing itself. This gives the ability of tutors and or students to let the other user see what exactly it is they are doing on their computer. Be this they're coding a complicated application, or maybe they have some really complicated physics homework where they don't want to have to redraw a whole kinematics thing for a specific situation. So having screen sharing really helps them prevent the use of unnecessary work and prevent having to explain abstractions on their own screen to someone else, and really help the student and tutor engage on a way that they wouldn't be able to otherwise.
So they're literally on the same page with screen sharing.
So we got that right, and like we talked about previously, SMS is something that's also incredibly important. Audio and screen sharing take care of students in the application, but what we want to make sure is that students are also taken care of inside the real world. Students who are, as we'd like to cover, non-traditional students as well, those students are often juggling responsibilities that are that are sort of outside the school and may take precedence over classes such as their children, or maybe making rent. All those things are very absolutely essential, and they may forget about things. So through the use of SMS, we make sure that we can remind them when a final paper is due next week, make sure they can meet their financial aid deadlines, because all those things, though they may seem like they go to the wayside in their mind, they're still very important and help them get where they want to be educationally.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of non-traditional students, they're juggling so many different priorities. And when you have so much on your plate, picking up your kid from daycare, or this bill is due at the end of the month, all of these deadlines can feel so interchangeable, I guess, and you might get a little bit lost. And I think what SMS does is it's right in your pocket, and it's a timely reminder. So right when you need it, you can be like, Oh, yes. Thank you, Anna. I forgot that my final paper was due in a week. Thank you so much. I better start studying right now.
Exactly.
Okay. Yeah, they can find those reminders, those suggestions really, really helpful. Um, and I'm sure, Alex, you have a lot more to say on this subject.
Yeah, totally, Sasha. It's actually a really good segue to what I wanted to mention, which was just a few ways in which some colleges are using Upswing to specifically focus on non-traditional students. The first college I wanted to talk about was Lee College out in southeastern Texas. They're a little bit southeast of Houston, I believe, and they use Upswing specifically for their weekend program. And their weekend program is geared towards adult learners who are, balancing a full-time job with going back to school. Perhaps they're also in the middle of a career change. And what we've seen is that for them, having this kind of resource actually enables the college to provide that kind of program. Because without something like Upswing, there's no way that those students would be able to access those campus resources on the weekends. Because number one, they're not going to campus. And then number two, a lot of those resources aren't available on the weekends either. So it's really been a critical part of their weekend experience and their ability to go and bring back more adult learners to campus. Also, in that same vein, we work with a handful of colleges that use Upswing pretty heavily in their online departments as well. So two of the colleges that use us specifically for online students is Indiana University, who uses us for their system-wide online school. So these are students that are attending Indiana University and are taking online classes exclusively. For them, they're able to access the same resources that a traditional student would access on campus. They're just doing it directly from their computer. So they don't have to be in Bloomington, Indiana to meet with a tutor or to talk with an advisor. But because IU is using Upswing, they're able to just log in, access all their campus resources on one platform, and get a similar level of support that a seated student is getting. And then we're also doing something really similar with North Carolina Central University, which is an HBCU out of Durham, North Carolina. And just like IU, they're also using Upswing as a way to bridge that gap between students that are taking online courses and the resources that they offer there on campus.
Thank you for highlighting some of those different ways that you can reach certain populations with technology. It really is amazing and inspiring to see so many students getting to where they want to be and using the tools that they have at their disposal. So next, we'd like to do a little comparison of how these recent student service technologies compare with more traditional methods. We did touch on this a little bit during the previous question of how do we make faculty and admin's life easier, but we didn't really contrast and compare. So let's go a little bit deeper on this.
Hi. So before sort of these ed tech solutions came into place, you had a lot of sort of manual submissions and calculations that were being pressed upon sort of either small departments or, depending on the size of your school, you had particular individuals. But now with the sort of the birth of ed tech and sort of it coming into its own form, you are available to, first off, sort of avoid those little crunch points, or
those bottlenecks.
Bottlenecks is the word.
Yeah, where it's one person inputting data manually for the entire organization.
Exactly. Now you have the gift of this entire framework that's meant to sort of assist you in this process instead of making you do all the work for it. So now you have this sort of bird's eye view of what's going on through your campus. And just like sort of life, like we covered earlier, is a lot of what's in the gray area. We allow you to sort of quantify that and to see where those gray areas are taking you, and maybe be it an individual student and or the subject itself. Those are things we allow you to see. How did, like, examples of questions would be, how do students feel after tests? What subjects are they learning and how effectively? By getting the feelings of students after their test and or midway through the semester, you're able to kind of project where these students will finish. Essentially how engaged they are based on how they're feeling and how you'll think they'll do, not just in this semester, but maybe in the upcoming semesters to graduation. So another thing, it's data, as we've kind of seen through the most recent years, is one of the probably the most valuable asset we have. And I mean, I recently watched a movie where they were scraping through the back of this very large library of articles, and sort of got me thinking, like, how difficult that would be if you were to scrape through grades and or trends of previous years. That means you compile all those, or you were gifted reports based on those. Should you not have those reports, you are kind of at a lack of resources. But given now that we have this strong data framework and strong platform framework in Upswing, as long as you've been on that platform, we can make all of these great insights. You can compare year to year. You can compare semester to semester across blocks as well in terms of sort of demographics. And all these things allow you to make really valuable insights as to the current state, past state, and future state of your student population.
Okay, I really like the term that you use, bird's eye, because I think it really helps us understand the scope, which might be one of the largest differences between the new technologies versus the traditional methods, is there's just so much more available in this framework versus, mostly manual submissions and calculations that were putting stress on individual admins or individual people, rather than a fully functioning, seamless framework that gives you this wide scope. So Alex, can you tell us a little bit of what you've seen, how to compare student services technologies with more traditional methods?
Yeah, totally, Sasha. I think for me, it's a very kind of simple and succinct statement in terms of how I view traditional technology versus newer methods. And my opinion is that technology can help to augment the high value efforts or services that you're providing on campus. And it can also help to eliminate the low value tasks that are having to be done on campus. And so I think Sasha and Michael kind of touched on these a little bit, but for me, it's really important because we view things like campus tutoring, campus advising, faculty office hours, financial aid support as being really critical components of a student's college experience. And one of the reasons why it is so critical and so important is because students are engaging with someone who's on campus, who can help them understand how to get through their college experience. And we simply view technology as being a way to augment these communications and these interactions. Where I think we can help to eliminate some of the more low value tasks or low value things that are being done is around areas like data entry or record keeping, or things where people that are doing the tasks are much more highly qualified to do other things that are higher value. And so Michael had a good analogy of the person in the back of the library who's having to scrape through old data to get historical data on students, and that's exactly the type of low value activity that we can really help to eliminate by bringing in newer technologies, and Upswing is just one way to do that. And I think later we'll touch on some other ways in which we see kind of the industry maturing, but that's really my perception on how the two really intersect.
Really, really strong points there, Alex. And as you were talking about the industry reaching more maturity and gaining more steam, I was interested to know what are some of the new student services technology you've seen? First, from you, Michael.
So obviously we have our new virtual learning center, but in addition to that, we have our virtual assistant, Anna, which we talked about previously. Think of her sort of as like a Siri or Alexa, but something that's specifically designed with your school in mind. She knows each of your students' schedule, coursework, and academic goals, and can sort of intuit reminders and give helpful information to keep your students successful and in school. This is not done only through text, but also through one of our product called Anna Voice, where students can send in voice messages and then Anna will respond in kind, well, with text. And this gives, as we talked about previously, where we want to make sure we can interact with students all over the map. This allows people, should it be difficult to send a text at this point, or should you not be able to at a certain point, you can still get that message into Anna and you can still get that information in.
Yeah, and that will make it so much easier for, say, if somebody is differently abled and they don't have use of their fingers, or they don't have use of their sight is gone. They can always speak directly to Anna through a device like an iPhone or an Amazon Echo or any of those Siri and Alexa one-offs, and say, hey, Anna, schedule me a tutoring session for 1 o'clock today. And she'll be right there ready to help. Just making sure that we are covering every type of student and making sure we're as accessible as possible for those that need it the most, right?
Correct.
All right, well, Alex, what are some of the new student services technology you've seen? I know that you're on the edge of these technologies. So what have you?
Yeah, great question, Sasha. So when I look at kind of the technology landscape right now, there are two things that I think a lot of tech companies are doing that is really going to help advance higher education, and that's number one, making college much more accessible for students, and number two, making college much more affordable for students. I'm actually not in the Upswing office today. I'm visiting another partner of ours called Straighterline. They're based out of Baltimore, and I think they're actually a really good case study on another company that is helping to make college more accessible and affordable. And what they do essentially is they work with colleges that don't want to offer their own developmental online courses, and they allow students to take online developmental courses directly through their website, and by forming a partnership with the college, students can actually get credit for taking the course. And the reason why they're so, I think, innovative is because they do it at an extremely low cost, and they do it on the student's timeline. So a student who is taking, a student who does have a job or has kids or has, would classify as non-traditional, can still use their system without having to physically be somewhere at a location or at a given time. And the best thing about it too is that they can actually get college credit, so that when they do transfer into another college, they're saving on tuition that they would otherwise have to spend taking a class at that college level. So they're one really cool one. Another one, which I think people don't typically think of as really a student service technology, but I think in the same vein, they're making college a lot more accessible and affordable, is Google Cloud. So being able to use a system where you can directly and immediately access, course materials, you can directly collaborate with, classmates on, projects or research papers. I think it doesn't necessarily lend itself directly to being called an education product, but I know that across a lot of our schools, more and more students are beginning to use Google Cloud, Google Docs, and it's really an important part of the college experience today. And then I wanted to also just touch on one thing that isn't really technology, but we've seen it be really effective, especially among our colleges with more non-traditional populations, and that's really having the college focus in on different cohorts of students, whether that's learning communities on campus. So for four-year institutions like University of North Texas, I know that they're really heavily invested in getting as many of their first-year students in a learning community as possible. And this could be something like, a community of students that are interested in foreign language, or a community of students who, may be interested in a specific subject area like, physics or math. But what it does is it kind of starts to build that community within college so that you as a student don't feel like, you're a single person trying to make it to graduation. You feel like you're there with a group of other students. And we see a lot of times our tier institutions also do this, even though it isn't physically on campus. They'll do things like minority male mentoring programs where, they'll connect in a senior student with a freshman. And the more that I think colleges can focus on building up those cohorts, the more they can help students feel like, they're actually in it as part of a village and not trying to graduate alone.
Okay, yeah, thank you for sharing all of those innovations. And I think one of the great things about your comment is that it goes back to the point of building relationship, creating a sense of community. Like, we can have all of these different innovations around that, but the student support at the center of it is really what is important. So let's switch back to the more technical aspect and cover how do we implement these technologies to reach students. Michael, can you give us the lowdown on this process?
Right. So it's this is something we covered a little bit earlier, but essentially there's two ways to go about this. First, with the sort of the simplest being, you send us a spreadsheet of your student list, and then we'll put those into our system, and we will make sure they all have logins accordingly. Pretty much that process takes a good 10 minutes. So the instant you get it to us, we're pretty quick on doing that. The alternative to that is doing an integrated login through either LDAP or SAML protocols with your IT department. That'll take roughly a day or so, but by doing so, you enable students to have the same login that they have at either on Starfish, Blackboard, or on a multitude of other LMSs. And that way they don't have to memorize a different login, a different password. And all of those logins and passwords will change accordingly as they change on your Active Directory. The hope is that by doing that, we make it as easy for the student experience, an easy student experience as possible.
Yeah, it's always such a pain, especially as a student, to have like a different login for each individual module. So it's really awesome that we can implement it this way and make it just a little bit more enticing for the students to get on that first time and keep coming back afterwards. Alex, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, so I think that there are a couple of things in addition to the technical integrations that we do that really help to reach students. The first of which I think is just really focusing in on the ease of use of our system for students. I think Sasha mentioned this in another slide, but when we were rolling out or when we were building our new virtual whiteboard, virtual VLC system, we actually tested the system out. We tested the user experience with over 100 different students and made sure that we incorporated their feedback in the final product. And even though this seems like something that most companies should be doing, a lot of times it's something that goes ignored. But for us, it's really important because for us, we know that when a student logs in for the first time, that's going to be the time that determines whether or not they continue using the service. That you don't get many chances to deliver a bad experience and then try to impress someone later on. So we worked with a lot of students to make sure that UX was right. And we also worked with about a dozen of our admins to make sure that the experience was also a really good one for them and their staff. And I think, for you all that are on the webinar, if you talk to any of our partners, one of the first things that they'll tell you is that the thing that they like the most about Upswing is how involved they're able to get with product development or contributing new ideas or really helping us build out our future and our roadmap of the product and the company. So ease of use, I think, is definitely a really big thing that we focus on to reach students. I think secondly, one thing that's really critical, and a lot of our colleges do this really well, is really getting faculty involved and faculty buy-in early on. So we know that administrators can reach out as much as they want to students, whether it's through email or through ANA or through other methods. But one of the people that students listen to the most, and probably the best way to get a student to behave in a certain way, is to actually get their faculty to recommend it. So it's important for us to show faculty that, number one, our service is really helping to get more students to succeed, because that's often the main thing that faculty care about. And number two, we're showing them that it is a system that students really enjoy using. So when they're recommending our service or a service to students, they know, number one, it works, and number two, students like it. And then finally, I think the kind of the most important way in which we can really reach students with technology is by providing a free service that students see value in day to day. And so that's why we're always so keen on making sure that no matter what, students have a really great experience on our system, and it's something that is really going to help them throughout their college journey.
Yes, yes. Thank you, Michael, for covering the more technical aspects, and then Alex for diving deeper into the long-term partnerships. With that being said, that was our final question that we had prepared. If you have any additional questions, please put them in the chat box on the lower corner of the screen. I'll stay on for a couple more minutes just to see if anybody has any remaining questions. If you think of something later on that you want to ask us, don't hesitate to reach out to speak@upswing.io. Yeah, so we'll just hang on for a couple minutes, and once again, drop your questions right in the text box.